All right, it's time to dovetail the drawer. Now what I've done is we've cut the front and back. We're just using poplar. We've cut the front and back and the two sides, making sure everything goes in and fits decently within our opening. And made sure everything was straight. Now, as I told you, I do dovetails different. And I'm going to be using my jig just because it's the way I usually do it. But we're going to show you some other ways of doing it. And this isn't about my jig, it's about dovetails. Now, and we mentioned that out here you're going to hear expressions about it's a 1 in 8 or a 1 in 6 degree, or angle rather. And the way to understand that, and this is just for information, is if you take and you measure in 1 inch, then you measure down 8 inches. Eight inches, 1 inch in, and you simply connect the line, the dots. That is a 1 in 8 taper. That's what they're referring to. The way you determine it. If you want a 1 in 6, you just come back up, a little steeper. A 1 in 8 translates to about a 7.5 degree. And a 1 in 6 is about a 10 degree. Now you can buy these little gadgets out here that will help you, and they're already laid out. Now what's the difference in them? Well, one is for hardwood and one is for softwood. It's kind of the way it goes. And don't ask me which one because I always confuse it. What I use is we're at about 9.5, so I'm kind of in the middle there, a little bit more on the higher side because I like a little bit more of the V on it, and that's just what I like. And it's an angle that, and what we did, just so you understand, is we wanted that lean neck, so we had it made to where we could get the leanest neck possible using the router. Again, fast. We didn't want to compromise the look, but we did want to be able to do it relatively fast and accurate. Okay, so let's just call this a fixed pin jig, meaning it doesn't move. The jig is stationary, and we have a backer on it. That's for coming into the wood and protects and helps prevent chip out. Now, in this case, this is a symmetrical cut, meaning everything this is laid out to where it'll work within the confines of the jig's set spacing. When we built the pie safe, we made the opening to work with that. If we were doing an asymmetrical, where we wanted to do something a little more contemporary, move the pins, and maybe do two pins in the middle, then skip a larger space and do them on the outside. We can do that, but that's not what this is. It's just about the dovetails and making a drawer. And with that said, if you don't have a means of dovetailing it, that's okay. We looked at that biscuit joiner when we were doing the drawer frames. You could set this up, and using those biscuits, you could put this together, and it would do fine. You could screw it. You can drill it and put a pin in it, peg it, like we've been doing the holes. Just butt glue it, and then when it's dry, drill it and put some pegs in there. Give you a pretty good look, and it's going to hold. And the reason it holds is that the issue here is that we have an end grain wood. And end grain is very porous. Now back, I think we talked about it back when we were talking about processing the wood, that most of the time when you buy hardwood, one of the things you'll notice is typically a lot of times out on the end of it, it will have checks or cracks. I told you, we don't call them cracks, we call them checks. So it may have some checks in there. And that's because the majority of the wood, the majority of the moisture is released through the end grain. Because again, it's porous. And think about this just like veins running all through this wood, and this is the end of them. And so wood's going to dry out more on the end than it is through the center. That's the reason you'll see seasoning checks in the end. And that's very, very typical. It doesn't mean you have a bad board. You know, it's almost always the case that you're going to see them there, and you always nip that off and then move on. But end grain is very porous. And so when you put glue on it, it's going to absorb a lot more of the glue than what would be a flat grain surface, like your edge or the face. Now here's a trick. If you take a little bit of glue and put on the end grain and wipe it really good, let it dry. Take a little sandpaper and lightly sand it. Then glue it. You're going to get a far stronger joint than if you just glue it straight up. And this is the weakest joint in woodworking. Just a butt joint glue. That is very weak. When you drill it, what you're creating is flat grain with it inside the hole. And so when you glue in, when you put the pegs in it, for example, or a dowel or anything else, it adds a tremendous amount of strength. The other thing that it does is that with that pin driven in there, as this drawer is pulled, we would have to shear that peg off in order to have the joint fail. And to understand shear, it'd be this. It's just like taking this pencil, and if you put it right between your fingers, and you know, you get out here, you could break it, but if you get right here really tight between there and you're pulling this way and pushing that way, you can't break it. That's shear strength, and that's what it creates. So there's an alternative. Now, for me to, let's get back to this. For me, when I set this up, and only reason I'm doing this is just so you can maybe pick up some tips. I can sit in here and measure, but I simply take and I, just looking down on it, I get my wood as close to center as I can. Then I just take a lead pencil, because I want a fine line, and I adjust until I get the same line on both sides. Then I know I'm dead center. In this case, I need to move just a little bit. I've got two lines, and all I'm going to do now is move to the center. And that's kind of hard to show you, but I'm going to try. There's just a very, very minor space in the middle of this. I don't even think you can see it on camera. I don't know. But the only thing I'm doing is just using that to guide me. Nice way of finding center. Let me double check it. Now I have one line. I'm perfectly centered. Now I'm going to go ahead and clamp and screw on a stop block here. And so we'll be right back and we'll cut them. Okay, one of the things, now that I'm in position, I've got a stop block. I want to draw, I'm going to take a piece of my actual wood and I'm going to draw it so I can get a depth. Now, we want to do the ends because we want, this will be our tailboard, meaning this is where the pins are going to come through. All right, so we'll see that this will be the side of the drawer. So we're doing the sides first. Now, one of the ways with the router to try to help prevent chip out is the same thing we did in those mortises. And that is simply to take a good marking gauge. Again, we want one that cuts and not one that scratches. We want a cut line. Now the rule here is what we want is we want to be, when you drew that line, I'm going to cut it and make the mark. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to set my depth at the very bottom of that line, which is going to give me about a 32nd or so over, because I want those pins to come out just a little bit on both sides so I can sand them back nice and smooth and get a good looking joint. So I'm just going to set it and then I'm going to scribe it on both sides. Now the other thing that this is going to do, gives us a cut line for that router bit so that it helps prevent chip out. A good thing. All right. Cut line. Now the jig can also be used in a router table, but this makes it easy for you to see it. Now I have what we call a pre-cut bit. Now I told you that we do it, this is if you look, this is their actual dovetail bit. If you look right here, we have a very narrow neck. And so what I do is I do a pre-cut for two reasons. Reason one is that I want to help take the stress off the neck, and the other reason is it helps a lot with chip out and gives me a nice clean cut. Okay. Get this out of your way. So all I'm going to do is just do a pre-cut. All right, I was talking and I noticed I had my scribe line a little low. So, but I got it corrected. Now I just finish it out with the dovetail bit. All right, we talked, now this poplar's a little fuzzy, but I don't have any chip out. We talked a little bit in the last time about the half pins, and we've got those. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through and cut the rest of the tails. I've got to cut the bottom of this and then the other side. Then we're going to come back and look at cutting the pins. Then we're going to look at cutting the grooves for the drawer bottom and assembling the drawer. All right, with all my tails cut, that's almost funny, huh? That happens now and then too. What I'm doing is I've got my fronts and back in my vise, and I just simply got another backer here just to get me up to level, and I'm going to lay this on. And then I'm going to draw my what's going to be my pins in. Making sure everything's lined up real well. Now what I do is, because this is kind of deep, I cheat. I take a mechanical pencil and just kind of go easy and let that lead stick out there pretty good, and draw them in because I want to be accurate. All right, my pins are drawn in. Now, just so you know, the wide side of the dovetail is always the inside, always. Now, whenever you're doing them, be very careful, and I can tell you this, you can confuse yourself real quick if you don't take your time. You don't want the wide side on this side of the board and the wide side on this side. Then you're making stairs. Just make sure you put the wide side on the same side. Okay. The only thing I have to do now is I just line my, this is the pin jig. And it cuts varying dovetails, meaning I can, in this case I'm doing a 3/4, I can do a half, 5/8, depending on the bit I have. But what it allows me to do, and that's done because this is on an angle, of course, and so by moving the pin jig fore and aft, I can set it for basically whatever size pin I want. And I can adjust, you know, to ever how tighter I want it. Again, this is just the way we do it. Now, yes, I could go in right now since I'm symmetrical and go ahead and put me a stop block on this and just roll, and that's what I'll do. But for right now, I'm just going to show it to you. Set my depth. Now all this does is this uses a pattern cutting bit. And what that is simply, it's got a top bearing, in this case a 5/8 with a 3/4 inch cut length. And the bearing simply tracks around here and makes the cut. Hold on. Again, I'm just easing in just a little bit to the bottom. Got a sore finger, so don't over tighten your router, you don't want to break it. All right. All right, we're on our way to having the drawer. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do the other 3 corners, and when we come back, we'll go to the table saw and we're going to look about putting the groove in the bottom of the drawer so we can put a drawer bottom in. All right, if I was doing more drawers, I'd probably just put a 1/4 inch dado blade in here, so I only had to make 1 pass. But with just 1 drawer, we can do it with a saw blade and do it in 2 passes. Now what I've done, I've got my depth set about 5/16 or so in this 3/4. And now what I want to do is I want to, remember we talked about how the half pin is used to hide the drawer bottom. So I want that cut to come in just above, just a little bit above that half pin, coming in right here. And we make our cuts. Now, be careful. You notice we've marked them inside. You want the inside down. You want the groove on the inside. Now what I'm looking at on these is just to see which side has the cleanest pin. If I happen to do get a little chip out, of course I want to put that on the inside. Now I just got to simply move over another 1/8, run them again. I want about a 1/4 inch wide groove. All right, it's time to get some glue and do some gluing. But before I do, I've got to make a couple little things here, and I'm going to make them and then show them to you. All right, one of the things I like to do is just take some masking tape and tape off what will be our corners, just to keep glue squeeze out. Now, if you recall, I don't remember which episode it was, we talked about using the heat gun to remove glue or hair dryer. If you leave this tape very long and the glue squeeze out, the glue will actually kind of glue the tape in the corner, and it can be a little frustrating to get off. If that happens to you, that heat gun thing works really well to get it out of there. The key is to, once the glue has started to set, kind of gooey, about like peanut butter, get it out of there. Now, let me grab some glue real quick. Basically, what I do is simply paint the pins and the tails. Make sure you get the back right here, because again, that's a flat grain area. It's going to give us a lot of strength. As well as, again, I just paint the whole surface. I'm not too worried about glue on the outside, because after it's all said and done, I can clean that up pretty easy. I just want to try to keep it out of that corner. That's the hardest area to get it cleaned out of. Now this is a point to where if you were using plywood for the bottom and you wanted to encapsulate it in here, this is where you would want your drawer bottom. This is where you would go ahead and assemble the drawer, get your measurements, and cut your plywood, so that when you assemble this, you could put your plywood in. In our world, we're going to make provision. We're going to be sliding the drawer bottom in from behind. So that's not a concern at the moment. Now the other thing you want to do, depending upon what glue you're using, is you want to work pretty quick doing this. Because one of the things that happens is most of your wood glues are water based, and it'll swell those pins. Now, when I do this, the tailboard, I just kind of get down in here. Then I brush over it. And that creates a flow down in here that the glue will run down. So when I push the pin board in, it pushes the glue ahead of it and coats the joint. You're not supposed to lay your glue brush handle in the glue. But nothing a little soap and water won't fix. All right. One thing I want to mention before we get too far here is that when you're cutting your pieces for your drawers, you want to make sure they're square. That'll throw a dovetail off and a drawer off about as quick as anything I know. Get snug on me. There it goes. And you see just how see how it's swelling that pin that quick? All right. Clamping this animal. This is what we had to make. Cauls. C-A-U-L-S. And here's what we've got. This is designed to sit on here. When we clamp it, we've got a cutout to allow the dovetail to protrude through. Now, I better put some tape on them. Again, that's one of those things, if you forget, you won't do it but once. Because then you get to chisel the cauls off. I ain't going to tell you how I know that, I just know. Seen it happen. All right. I'm going to pull it up. The other thing the caul does is it allows you to distribute pressure. In this case, I can get by with one clamp. Now, I see a lot of guys, when they're clamping something like this, they'll take a pipe clamp and just crank it down so tight. On a drawer, especially a long drawer like this, be very, very careful with that. The reason is that when you put that much pressure this way, you can actually bow the front in or out, and when it dries, it's going to be bowed. So don't get carried away with that. You want enough pressure to pull it together. If you have to put a lot of pressure on it, put the pressure on, get it pulled up tight, then back off of it. You don't want to leave it set in that much pressure. If you have an issue with the front being whichever one is, now that's another reason we like doing the drawers this way, is because at this point, now as I showed you on the Cherry slant front, if we were doing it like we were doing the slant front, what we would do is we would have this front board would be Cherry. So when we put our Cherry overlay front on it, it looks like it's all half blind. In this case, this is the painted one, and but we're still just going to do an applied front. It's just the way we do it. Now, a lot of people will not like this technique of doing applied fronts, but we do, and it has served us well. No, it's not necessarily the most traditional way of doing it, and using routers isn't the most traditional way of cutting dovetails, but it sure is effective. And make sure this drawer is square. And it is. You know, if you've done your dovetails well, rare do you ever see a dovetail joint not want to be square. If you've got your ends square, when you start and you've got your cuts square, it's going to work out real well. Okay, take a look inside and you'll see the glue squeeze out. Now, this is a perfect place, and I'm going to go grab one right now. Be right back. All right, this is a perfect place for us to put one of them squaring panels or cawls, just like we used in the cases. In the event that you're getting, this is, if I put another one, if this was the front and I put another one over here, it's also going to help me to keep my front from bowing. It's going to hold everything nice and square and straight. And when I say put one over here, that's only if I have a bow issue. This one's probably 13 or so square inches, so it's plenty big in here. It's going to hold this whole drawer square, and we just let it dry. Okay, when we come back, we're going to be ready to get it in the case, get it working, get a provision made for our bottom, and get an applied front on. Then, I don't know if we'll get it all in this webisode or not, but then we're going to look at some alternative ways of cutting dovetails, including the traditional way.